Johnny Winter. What if I told you that a single sentence, just one short paragraph buried in the middle of a magazine article, ended up launching the most expensive record deal in history? And what if that same person, despite all that success, spent most of their life being systematically erased from the very story they created? This is the story of someone whose talent was undeniable, whose hands were impossibly fast, and whose life became a masterclass in how the world treats gifts it doesn't quite know what to do with. The unusual beginning. Johnny Dawson Winter III entered the world on February 23, 1944, in a Texas oil town called Beaumont. His parents soon discovered their newborn son had albinism, completely white hair, pale skin, and eyes that struggled to focus. 3 years later, his younger brother Edgar arrived with the exact same condition. In 1940s Texas, being different wasn't just noticed, it was punished. Picture being a kid who physically couldn't see across a classroom, whose crossed eye made catching a ball impossible, existing in a segregated, tough oil town where difference meant danger. Other children did what they always do. They tested him daily. Johnny learned early that survival meant finding a place where the staring stopped. That place became music. His parents put a clarinet in his hands at 5. A ukulele followed. By 10, he and his brother were singing together on local television. Two unforgettable white-haired kids who gave people something to actually watch for instead of mock. But everything changed when a local disc jockey named J.P. Richardson, who'd later become famous as the Big Bopper, played blues records on the radio. Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Bobby Bland, a half-blind teenager in Texas, decided that moment would define the rest of his life. By 15, he'd formed his first band with Edgar on keyboards. They recorded School Day Blues for a Houston label. He was already making records while still struggling to see the chalkboard at school. But the real breakthrough, the moment that would shake the entire industry, required exactly 38 words. The paragraph that changed everything. On December 7, 1968, Rolling Stone published a piece examining the Texas music scene. Two writers, Larry Sepulado and John Burks, had written hundreds of paragraphs about various musicians. But buried somewhere in the middle was this description. If you can imagine a 130-pound cross-eyed albino with long hair playing some of the most gutsy, fluid blues guitar you've ever heard, then you've got Johnny Winter. That was it. One paragraph. But it landed on the exact desk of a New York club owner named Steve Paul, who read it and immediately flew to Texas. Within weeks, every major record label knew about this freak of nature blues player, and suddenly they were all competing to sign him. RCA, Atlantic, Elektra, Columbia, the biggest names in the business were in a bidding war over a kid nobody outside Texas had heard of. The competition wasn't rational. It was desperate, it was hungry, and it reached numbers that had never been offered to any new solo artist before. The price tag nobody expected. In December 1968, Mike Bloomfield, already a renowned blues guitarist, invited the unknown Texas kid to sing one song at the Fillmore East in New York. Just one, a courtesy really. Johnny chose B.B. King's It's My Own Fault. The crowd that had come for Bloomfield went home talking about the albino. Columbia Records executives in the audience immediately knew what they needed to do. Within days, the deal was signed. $600,000. The largest advance ever paid to a new solo artist in recording history. In 1969, that was an astronomical sum, equivalent to millions in today's money, given to someone with no hit records, no national following, and no commercial track record whatsoever. Think about that for a second. A blind kid from an oil town who'd been playing roadside bars for gas money 2 years earlier suddenly had more money than most people earn in a lifetime. He rushed into a Nashville studio, assembled his Texas trio with bassist Tommy Shannon and drummer Uncle John Turner, added his brother Edgar on keys, and released his major label debut, simply called Johnny Winter. It cracked the top 25. He was famous before America really knew who he was. The hype was impossible. The expectations were crushing. And then came the moment that should have cemented his legend forever. The night that disappeared. August 1969. Woodstock Festival. 500,000 people gathered for what would become the most documented musical event in history. Johnny took the stage around midnight and played for roughly 65 minutes of absolutely ferocious blues guitar. Slide work, electric runs, everything he had. His brother came out and joined him. Everyone who was there remembers it as extraordinary. One of the most stunning performances of the entire 3 days. And then it vanished. When the Woodstock film came out, and made legends out of the guitarists who appeared in it, Johnny wasn't there. When the soundtrack album shipped millions of copies, and turned artists like Santana and Sly Stone into household names, Johnny was absent. His entire set, the biggest performance of his early career, in front of the largest crowd possible, was simply cut out. For 40 years, the world didn't hear it. That erasure became a pattern that would haunt him for life. The multiplication of ghosts. Here's a number that should be mathematically impossible. The man who took the largest advance in recording history, who filled concert halls throughout the 70s, who released more than 20 albums in his lifetime, achieved exactly one gold record. 1. A 1971 live album. That's the only award his entire catalog ever earned. Why? Because the moment he got famous, the people who'd recorded him cheaply years earlier came crawling back to cash in. Producers and label owners sold his early recordings to competitors. Former associates packaged his master tapes into cheap albums designed to trick fans into thinking they were buying new releases. Johnny watched bootleg versions of his own music flood the market. He didn't approve them. He wasn't paid for them. And by his own account, most of the Johnny Winter records on store shelves weren't ones he'd actually sanctioned. Imagine being so famous that most of the records with your name on them are ones you never touched and never made money from. Imagine having your work stripped and sold repeatedly while you watched helplessly. The breaking point. By the early 70s, Johnny had everything the world said he should want. He was also quietly coming apart. Heroin found him, or perhaps he found it. The pressure of touring, the sense of being consumed by an industry he couldn't control, the watching of his own work being sold without permission, all of it collapsed into addiction. Friends described a man sinking into a darkness so deep that they genuinely feared he wouldn't survive it. There was no celebrity rehab back then, no public roadmap for how a rock star was supposed to recover. He went home to Beaumont and eventually spent roughly 9 months in a New Orleans hospital, fighting to get clean the hard way. He simply disappeared from the music world for nearly 2 years. The momentum from those early releases evaporated. When his brother Edgar released a live album, he opened it by answering the question everyone kept asking. Where's your brother? The answer was, in a hospital bed 1,000 miles away, fighting to stay alive. When Johnny finally emerged, he didn't hide from what had happened. He named his comeback after it. Still Alive and Well. In March 1973, after nearly 3 years away, Johnny released a new album with a title that was definitely not marketing. It was a statement. Still alive and well. It meant, I went down. I almost didn't come back. But here I am. The record cracked the top 25. It included a song written specifically for him, by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The Rolling Stones offering a gift to a Texas kid as a welcome home present. For one moment, the story felt like it had a real second act. A survivor. A comeback. A man who'd beaten the thing that nearly killed him at 26. But Johnny had never cared about being a rock star. He'd always hated the detours into mainstream rock. Always felt he'd betrayed his blues roots. There was only one thing he'd actually wanted since he was 15 years old, listening to the radio in Beaumont. He wanted to play with Muddy Waters, the man whose voice had reached through time and space and completely rearranged his life. The greatest gift. By the mid-70s, Muddy Waters was a legend, but a fading one. Between labels, underused, losing relevance. So Johnny, now a star with actual power and leverage, did something remarkable. He brought his hero into the studio and produced a series of albums designed with surgical precision to let the world hear Muddy Waters the way Johnny had always heard him. The results were extraordinary. Hard Again. I'm Ready. A live recording. 3 of the albums Johnny produced for Muddy Waters won Grammy Awards. He didn't just back his hero, he engineered a full creative resurrection, pointing people toward music they'd been ignoring. Muddy reportedly began to think of the white-haired Texas kid as an adopted son. For Johnny, who'd idolized this man since his teenage years, it was the proudest work of his entire life. Now hold that image. Johnny sitting behind glass, producing Grammy-winning album after Grammy-winning album. And every single trophy belonged to someone else. He'd made his childhood idol a Grammy winner, 3 times. He'd made the blues fashionable for an entire generation of rock listeners. And across more than 4 decades of his own recording career, Johnny had been nominated for Grammy after Grammy. He'd never won a single one. The slow fade. For 2 decades, the fastest hands in Texas gradually became slower. Johnny kept touring, kept recording for smaller blues labels, kept the white hair and kept trying. But something was deteriorating. He'd conquered heroin years earlier, but over the long stretch that followed, he became dependent on methadone and other medications. Bandmates and close friends watched as he became alarmingly frail. He struggled to speak sometimes. He needed help on and off the stage. The fastest guitarist in Texas was being slowly diminished by something he couldn't quite climb out of. The story looked like it might just quietly fade to nothing. A great talent, playing smaller and smaller rooms, until there was nothing left. And then, at the very end of the 90s, someone walked into the band who decided that wasn't how this was going to end. The man with the guitar. His name was Paul Nelson. He showed up in 1999 as a guitarist, and gradually, he took over running Johnny's career. What Nelson did, the thing that actually mattered, was help Johnny get off methadone. He cleaned up the business side. He surrounded Johnny with people who wanted him healthy instead of just wanting him on stage. The change was visible. In 2011, at nearly 70 years old, Johnny released an album called Roots, a fierce return to the blues standards that had shaped him, with younger guitar heroes like Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks lining up to play alongside the man who'd actually inspired them. There was supposed to be a documentary, a box set, a celebration of his 70th birthday. For the first time in decades, the story was pointing upward. That's exactly when it ran out of time. The hotel room. In Switzerland. In July 2014, Johnny was in the middle of a European tour celebrating his 70th year. A documentary about his life had premiered. A new album called Step Back was finished and ready for release. He was genuinely in the middle of a real comeback. On July 16th, in a hotel room near Zurich, Johnny died in his sleep. He was 70 years old. Emphysema and pneumonia, according to the reports. A hard life, finally collecting what it was owed. He died believing his best work might still be ahead of him. He had no idea that the greatest honor of his entire existence was already recorded, already pressed, and sitting in a warehouse, waiting to be released. He would never see it arrive. The Grammy that came too late, Step Back, was released 7 weeks after Johnny died. The world responded the way it never quite had while he was alive to experience it. The album debuted at number 1 on the blues charts. It cracked the top 20 of the main album charts. The tributes poured in from musicians and fans and industry people who suddenly seemed to understand what they'd been missing. Then, at the 2015 Grammy Awards, Step Back won Best Blues Album. The 130-pound albino kid from Beaumont. The one too strange and too overlooked for the official story. After more than 24 albums, after more than 4 decades, after making Muddy Waters a Grammy winner 3 times over while sitting behind the glass, after a lifetime of nominations and 0 wins, Johnny Winter finally held a Grammy of his own. And then he'd been dead for 7 months. He never got to hold it. Never heard his name called. Never got to look back at the industry that had paid him a fortune at 25, and then systematically erased him and say, "See, I told you I was still alive and well." The fastest hands that nobody protected finally got their recognition. Johnny just wasn't there to feel it. What moves you most about this story? Is it the unfairness of it all? The beauty of the comeback? Or the tragedy of the timing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe to explore more stories about the artists and legends that shaped everything.